This was the case that changed how regulators viewed diesel technology. What happened next sent shockwaves through boardrooms and repair shops. The stakes were public health, corporate trust, and the credibility of emissions testing. Prosecutors argued that clean air laws mean nothing without honest compliance. Welcome to Gavel Files, where justice tells its story. Today we examine United States versus Volkswagen AG, known as Dieselgate. It is a story of software, secrecy, and consequences. According to court documents, the United States Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Department of Justice led enforcement. Their target was Volkswagen AG and related entities. Audi AG and Porsche AG were pulled into the same orbit. Volkswagen Group of America, Inc. faced the American fallout directly. The issue centered on diesel vehicles sold as clean and efficient. Behind that promise was code designed to mislead. According to testimony summarized in filings, engineers built software into engine control units. That software could detect when a vehicle was being tested. It recognized steering patterns and laboratory driving profiles. It watched for conditions that matched federal test procedures. When those conditions appeared, emissions controls switched into a compliant mode. On the road, the software allowed higher pollution output. The evidence showed this was not a random glitch. It was a deliberate strategy, repeated across model lines. The affected vehicles were sold across multiple model years. Court documents reveal the scale was about 590,000 diesel cars. Many used 2.0-liter engines. Others involved 3.0-liter engines. Buyers believed they were getting low emissions performance. Regulators believed certification data reflected real-world driving. Communities believed tailpipes were being regulated. Those beliefs would not survive the investigations. The incident that triggered the federal response was not a single crash. It was a pattern revealed by testing that did not match the paperwork. Researchers and regulators compared lab results with road measurements. Emissions testing data began to diverge sharply. Nitrogen oxides levels were far above allowable standards in real driving. The evidence showed some vehicles emitted up to 40 times the legal limit. That number carried a human cost in air quality. It also carried a legal cost in fraud exposure. In September of 2015, the EPA issued a notice of violation. The document named defeat devices and demanded answers. Automakers watched closely because the allegation was unprecedented in scale. Consumers watched too because the cars were in their driveways. According to court documents, the notice forced a public reckoning. Within days, the company faced investigations on multiple continents. In the United States, the enforcement machine shifted into high gear. But what happened next would change everything. Investigators began pulling apart the story line by line. The EPA collaborated with California Air Resources Board experts. Federal prosecutors coordinated with Civil Enforcement Counsel. According to court documents, agencies examined code, calibration maps, and certification submissions. They compared internal emails with public statements. They traced who knew what and when. They also analyzed how the cheating could remain hidden for years. The charges and claims formed a legal net. Clean Air Act violations addressed the defeat devices on 2.0-liter engines. Additional Clean Air Act violations covered 3.0-liter engines. Criminal felony counts were placed at the center of the case. Environmental fraud allegations followed the conduct beyond simple non-compliance. Customs fraud claims focused on import representations. Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act theories targeted broader misconduct. Prosecutors argued that the fraud harmed more than regulators. They said it harmed markets, lenders, and public trust. The grand jury returned an indictment in the criminal track. It alleged a conspiracy to defraud the United States. The evidence showed a coordinated plan to sell vehicles under false emissions claims. According to testimony referenced in the record, some employees discussed test recognition strategies. Others discussed how to answer regulator questions. The defense maintained that responsibility was diffuse. They suggested that complex engineering decisions lacked criminal intent. But prosecutors argued that internal communications showed knowledge and direction. Court documents reveal messages warning that the approach was illegal. Pre-trial litigation did not look like a typical courtroom spectacle. Much of the pressure came through negotiation and disclosure. Regulators demanded recalls, fixes, and consumer remedies. Prosecutors demanded admissions and penalties. The company faced the risk of trial and the risk of losing access to markets. According to court documents, the strategy became containment. The question was how to settle without collapsing the enterprise. There was no classic jury selection sequence. There were no televised openings before a seated panel. Yet there was still drama, because every filing carried reputational weight. The government positioned the case as corporate deceit on a massive scale. The defense maintained the company could reform and remediate. Behind closed doors, settlement terms hardened. The public only saw the headlines. Inside, the legal consequences were being measured in billions. Drop a comment. Do you think the verdict was fair? And then the prosecution revealed their key evidence. First came the software analysis. Investigators described how the code detected testing conditions. The evidence showed the system reduced emissions only when it sensed a lab scenario. On ordinary roads, the calibration shifted to performance and durability. According to court documents, this dual behavior was the heart of the defeat device. It turned the certification process into theater. Second came emissions testing data. Regulators compared laboratory compliance with portable road testing. The evidence showed nitrogen oxide spikes during normal driving. Experts explained how those pollutants contribute to smog and respiratory harm. Prosecutors argued that the legal standard is not optional. They said certification depends on honest representation. When the representation is false, the system fails. Third came internal communications. Court documents reveal emails and reports discussing the mismatch. Some communications discussed how to avoid detection. Others discussed what to tell regulators during inquiries. According to testimony summarized by prosecutors, engineers and managers understood the risk. The government framed this as knowledge and intent. The defense maintained that the company was too large for unified intent. They argued that certain decisions were made under pressure. They also argued that later cooperation mattered. Fourth came investigation reports from multiple jurisdictions. The EPA findings aligned with California testing. European scrutiny reinforced the long-term nature of the conduct. The evidence showed a sustained pattern across markets. Prosecutors argued that this was not isolated to one team. They said it was embedded in product strategy. The defense maintained that the company implemented changes once confronted. They pointed to remedial programs and compliance reforms. If this case is gripping you, hit that like button. The defense strategy focused on resolution and reform. Rather than contest every allegation in open court, the company moved toward a guilty plea. The defense maintained that pleading could accelerate restitution and fixes. They emphasized the complexity of modern engine systems. They suggested that regulatory standards evolved faster than technology. But prosecutors argued that the company did not merely fall behind. They said it built a switch to pass tests deceptively. According to court documents, the government demanded a clear admission. They wanted deterrence for the entire industry. The company agreed to plead guilty in January of 2017. It pleaded guilty to 3 criminal felony counts. It also accepted broad civil responsibility. The plea was more than a legal formality. It was a public confession that the software was designed to cheat. Court documents reveal the company admitted it misled regulators and consumers. That admission would anchor future litigation worldwide. The jury had heard enough. But they were not ready for this. In a traditional trial, closing arguments would frame guilt and doubt. Here, the closing came through statements attached to agreements. Prosecutors argued that penalties had to match the scale. They emphasized the number of affected vehicles and the years involved. They emphasized the pollution levels and the deception. The defense maintained that sweeping reforms were underway. They argued that punishment should not destroy jobs and suppliers. They sought credit for cooperation and remediation. There was no deliberation room because there was no jury verdict form. The decisive moment was the plea and settlement acceptance. The public, however, still demanded a moral verdict. Many owners felt betrayed by marketing claims. Many communities felt betrayed by air quality promises. Regulators felt the integrity of testing had been attacked. The company faced a reckoning beyond the courtroom. After deliberation, the foreman stood up. The verdict, in legal terms, was the guilty plea. The company pleaded guilty to 3 criminal felony counts. Civil liability was established through federal enforcement settlements. The evidence showed defeat devices violated the Clean Air Act. Prosecutors argued that the plea proved intentional misconduct. The defense maintained that acceptance of responsibility was the path forward. Sentencing and aftermath arrived in the form of penalties and obligations. Court documents reveal criminal penalties of $2.8 billion. Civil penalties included $1.5 billion tied to EPA and customs claims. Total penalties and settlements exceeded $30 billion globally. Injunctive relief required compliance reforms and monitoring. Emissions modifications were mandated for affected vehicles. The company also faced continuing private lawsuits and reputational damage. No individual prison sentences were imposed in the primary settlement framework. However, court documents reveal personal financial contributions were required from certain former executives. Former CEO Martin Winterkorn and board member Rupert Stadler faced continuing exposure. Their legal situations remained complicated across jurisdictions. The corporate plea did not end individual scrutiny. Appeals and related litigation continued abroad. In September of 2025, a German Federal Court of Justice ruling changed the landscape. The court ruled a prior settlement tied to directors' and officers' insurance was null and void. According to court documents, the court found inadequate shareholder disclosure. The ruling struck approval of the €270 million insurance portion. The matter was remanded for reconsideration in lower court. The consequences echoed back into corporate governance debates. The legal impact in the United States was immediate and lasting. Prosecutors argued the case proved corporations can face criminal accountability. The evidence showed environmental enforcement can reach boardroom decisions. Regulators strengthened real-world emissions testing protocols. The case influenced how compliance programs are evaluated. It also influenced how disclosures are drafted for investors. According to court documents, the settlements required operational transformation. They demanded oversight, reporting, and a culture shift. Where are they now? The EPA and the DOJ continue enforcement across the auto sector. California regulators remain active in monitoring compliance. Volkswagen continues operating as a global manufacturer. It completed emissions modifications for affected vehicles by January 6, 2017. Yet litigation continues, especially around settlement validity in Germany. The scandal remains a warning label on corporate strategy. Court documents reveal the consequences did not end with one plea. The United States versus Volkswagen AG Dieselgate reminds us that justice is never simple. Share this video with someone who cares about justice. Drop a comment with your verdict. Guilty or not guilty? Hit like and subscribe to Gavel Files for more cases where justice tells its story. Next week, we examine another case that shook the nation.